This is Keep Up. I'm your host, Cynthia Dill. It is Wednesday, March 18th, 2026. I'm in my Cape Elizabeth studio, and I am pleased to have as a guest Leyland Streiff, Maine's super dad, who is celebrating a big success. Welcome to the show, Leyland.
Thank you so much for having me again.
Well, just in case anyone is not in the loop, you led a successful citizens campaign effort to get a question on the ballot in November, and yesterday, you got word that you collected enough signatures, and the headlines read today: "State will vote on banning trans athletes in girls' sports."
Amazing.
You win some, you lose some. So
Yeah,
first,
there's
tell
a
us
lot of
about
those
you.
on the headlines. Amazing how few of them I think have actually read the proposed act, but hey, they'll get there.
Exactly. Because you're not trying to ban anybody from playing sports in November, are you? What are
Quite
you
the
trying to do?
opposite. Nobody will be banned, and we will be ending sex-based discrimination, which those are the two things that I think are so wild that we keep hearing in headlines and, opposing groups keep, knocking the effort about is one, saying people are going to be banned. No, not going to happen. This is inclusive. Everybody has a sex. Everybody gets to play sports and access private facilities designated by their sex, male, female, and coed.
Everybody
And
plays by the same rules.
everybody plays by the exact same rules, and the rules that we've had for decades, ever since Title IX came into existence, and preserves the equal opportunity that sex is meant to have under the law. So I think that's the other side of this as well, is not only are we ensuring that private spaces and competitive sports are going to be designated by sex, in doing so, we are also ending sex-based discrimination that is happening right now in our public schools, which I find insane. We are way too progressive of a state to start reintroducing regressive sexist discrimination against kids that want to have opportunities in private spaces by their sex.
Well, this is going to be an interesting fight because the articles that I just referred to, for instance, in the Portland Press Herald, say that, of course, a campaign is a great thing for special interest groups because that's what gives them the meat for the grinder. They can raise their money, they can,
Right.
stay employed, they can be relevant. And so the liberal organizations that are all aligned essentially with the Democratic Party on all these cultural issues, all part of the same really organization, are gathering to fight your effort.
Yeah.
And they include groups that allegedly are advocating for the rights of women and gender nonconforming people, which also is a stunning it's almost too much to even comprehend sometimes, that the Maine women's lobby is actually doesn't really support the reality of women. So how do you see that playing out? I mean, you're fighting the culture wars, and it's a battle unlike any other, really.
Yeah, the whole idea of a culture war, I feel like is interesting with this because people said, "Oh, you've inserted yourself into a culture war," and I'm unsure who is making that war. Even we talk about you talked about sort of the alignment of the Democratic Party. Even that I find strange. You are a lifelong Democrat. There are so many lifelong Democrats that do not in any way agree with something that is, perceived to be a party line issue. It is not a party line issue. Maybe if you go back in time 5 or 6 years ago, it felt that way, and there was, sort of the red or blue take on this entire issue. It's not the case. The vast majority of people, Democrats, Republicans, and independents, agree that kids deserve opportunities in private spaces designated by their sex. This is not a party line problem. This is not a party line perspective, and continuing to perpetuate it that way from a campaign perspective, a funding perspective, and an overall campaigning with given the election this year perspective, I think is a losing proposition. And I think it is something that is at odds with the general sentiment and will of normal everyday people across Maine.
I thought, I think you might be right that the majority of people across Maine are not necessarily divided along partisan lines on this issue. But I think when it comes to the actual parties and their positions and their platforms and their candidates and their votes, it really is a division along party lines because the Democratic Party wants to enshrine gender identity into the Constitution. And the Republican Party wants to repeal the gender identity laws that are causing us all these problems. I mean, that's the root cause of
Right.
all of these problems is we adopted gender identity into our Maine Human Rights Act in 2019, and thereafter it just saturated our lives, including sports.
Agree. Well,
But
yeah.
so your effort though, the law itself, tell us what the law itself is going, the people are going to vote on in November, the law itself. And then I want to talk to you a little bit about how the wording of the question you hope it's going to be and what the dynamics
Yeah,
around that.
great. So, what the act will do first, we need educated voters. So everybody should go to our website, protectgirlsportsinmaine.com, and read the act. So you got to go there. You got to check it out. You got to read the language. Unfortunately, I have to say that a lot of the press that's reporting on this clearly has not even read the language itself. For example, they
It's
continue to report
infuriating.
on the word gender. The word gender is not even included in the act. This is about preserving sex-based rights. So please go read it. What this act does is incredibly simple. It defines sex as recorded on your birth certificate, which is an innate biological marker, and it ensures that competitive sports in public schools, as well as private spaces, locker rooms, showers, and bathrooms, are designated by sex: male, female, and then in the case of some sports, coed. Very simple. In other words, the way that sports and bathrooms were for all of eternity until about 5 seconds ago. That is literally all that this proposed bill does. It is incredibly simple. It designates sports and private facilities by sex, and the sort of asterisk with that is on the co-ed piece when we talk about sports, and people say, "Was it's creating a new category and it's going to cost us all this money and time?" No, it's literally the same way that it works today and has always worked. If there is not a sex-specific option for that sport is by default co-ed. We've seen this in wrestling for decades. That's a primarily male sport, but there are many females, and a growing amount since I wrestled a long time ago, that want to participate in that sport. Amazing. It's co-ed then. Football, same thing. Girl wants to play football. Girl can make the team. Awesome. Play football. That is now a co-ed sport. Field hockey has been this way forever. So this is not introducing some new concept. This is ensuring a concept that has worked for decades, that is actually lawful, based on ensuring there is no discrimination against sex, is actually enacted as policy across our state. So this is very simple and very straightforward.
What about the question itself? I mean, unfortunately, people are like a majority of the people probably will not read the law. They're going to take their signals from their groups because people are tribal. And so
Yep.
the signals are going to, unfortunately, and so the question though matters. The question itself, the wording of the question as opposed to the law. What do you understand the question will be, or the process around getting the question you want? What's the question you want?
Well, I think the constitutional process is the fact that the Secretary of State's office is supposed to provide a, quote, clear and concise question that is aligned to the proposed act. Great. As long as they just do their constitutional job, I think we're going to love whatever they come up with. Obviously that I'm being an optimist in this, so we got to see the twists and the turns. Now, when it comes to the actual question itself, we won't know that for a bit of time. This goes to the legislature first, and they get their chance to pass it, which you should. But if you don't, then it goes back to the Secretary of State. They will write the question, and then there will be public comment, including from us, on that question. Now, there's a couple
So
things.
there's no way around it. Shanna Bellows is going to be the Secretary of State who writes the question.
Correct.
Yes. And
Correct.
Is that a concern of yours?
No, I think as long as she does her constitutional job, no. I think that is what is required of her. And we have given an act that is so simple that unless she will unlawfully include concepts or words that are not even included in the proposed act, then I think that we're going to end up in a good place with the question. I'll give you an example of that. The title of the act is something that the Secretary of State's office has prescribed to the bill. We did not come up with that. The shorthand for us was the Protect Girls Sports in Maine Act. The actual name of the proposed act, as given by the Secretary of State's office, is an act to designate school sports participation and facilities by sex. Fantastic. That's great. That is on the nose, on the money. That is in the totality, everything that this act does. So as long as we're able to stick to that type of language and that type of intent, then I think we're good, versus introducing something that doesn't exist. For example,
Like gender identity?
Gender or gender identity is literally not in the bill. People, in our opinion, should have whatever gender identity they want. That has nothing to do with our bill. Sex deserves equal protection and opportunity under the law. It is unlawful to have any other perspective on that. All this does is ensure sex does not continue to get discriminated against. It has nothing to do with someone's gender identity. Go ahead and have a gender identity. You also have a sex, and this ensures that the categorization of private facilities in sports, sex matters.
And people who want to get involved in this campaign, I know you had some professional help collecting signatures, which was a good
Yeah,
thing because the numbers were pretty close. I mean,
pretty close.
you had to, according to the newspaper, assuming it's correct, you collected 79,682 signatures. Of that, 71,000 and a few were valid. So that means over like 8,500 signatures were not valid.
Right.
But you still got enough with a cushion by about 3,351 votes. So were you surprised at the number of invalid signatures?
We knew that there would be invalid signatures. So, I think that's within the threshold of looking at other referendums and the sort of margin of error that ultimately comes out of them. I think the one that is probably higher than what we would have wanted is the number. There's about 5,000 of them were deemed invalid as those registered voters were not actually registered in the municipalities where they had signed their signature to. And that's a little bit more, higher
Yeah.
than maybe we would wanted, because what ends up happening there is the town themselves has actually already pre-verified, yes, they are a registered voter. But for example, they might have been working off of an outdated voter file and maybe that person moved. So they are a
Oh,
real voter,
interesting.
but they might have gone somewhere else. And so that's a bummer, I think, not only for us, but obviously for those people that signed it, that are valid registered voters, but maybe their address has changed and therefore their municipality has changed, and so where they've gotten the sort of validation done was in the wrong place. But it's okay, and we feel good about the margin that we have, in that we've cleared the hurdle that we need to, and that we've got the right margin of error as we go into sort of this next phase.
And the next phase is going to be huge. I mean, this is not a referendum that's going to be alone on a ballot that, you're going to worry about turnout. November is going to be huge. I mean, we have a governor's race on the ballot. We have U.S. Senate race on the ballot. And the second CD, there's a house seat. The legislature is like, very, it could go either way to have a majority. And just to remind people, if the legislature flips from a Democratic majority to a Republican majority, that means all of the constitutional officers, like the Secretary of State, like all the others, will get voted by the legislature. So they're essentially partisan positions, which is, I think, too bad. I think we should have a publicly elected constitutional officer. But that's a decision for another day. But how do you see the other dynamics of November impacting your question?
Yeah, I think a lot of people that are politicians or sort of more political operatives probably have a lot more perspective on that, and sort of how this election is going to push and pull what we're doing and what our referendum means for the rest of the election. I think the way that I look at this, and the core of us that are running this citizens initiative, is that truly we don't see this as a partisan issue. We don't see this as a party line issue. We have people from all sides, Democrats, independents, Republicans, that are behind our effort and agree with our effort, and that is aligned to the overall populace of Maine. So the way that we, see this going forward is that, we equally embrace candidates on every single side of the political spectrum that, agree with our position. We are not looking to, endorse or only get endorsed by Republicans, for example. We would love endorsement by Democrat candidates and independent candidates. This is something that we see. We are open. We want to be everywhere. I would love to be at the, Democrat convention and the Republican convention talking about this with people. I don't want to be in one place or the other. This is something that the totality of Maine is really behind from a majority perspective. And I think the last thing about that I think is really interesting is there's a lot of conversation right now about the preservation of democracy and ensuring that we all, exercise the democratic process. Amen. All about it. Like I couldn't agree more. And this is the most democratic way that I think all of us as citizens could come up with, that we could enact something like this. If our represented officials are not doing the will of the people, we as citizens get to, through a simple majority, make a decision for our entire state, regardless of what side of the issue you're on. I mean, what's more democratic than that? I mean, that that is democracy at work right here. So I hope everybody, regardless of sort of where you fall on the issue, is excited about this and the fact that their voice truly gets to be heard directly on this vote and not through, a current elected official or a prospective elected official that's going to come in the November election.
Have you asked the Democratic Party to make an appearance at the convention?
I haven't yet. I've been checking their website. It looks like it's like to come. There's no registration available yet. So I want to be there. I don't want to be showing up at the Republican one and not being able to be at the Democrat one. Should be able to be everywhere. And there's going to be people on both sides at each of those that might not agree with me and agree with our group. And that's great. Like, isn't that what we're here for?
They'll probably tell you to buy a booth, like you want to be at the convention.
Okay.
Yeah,
We'll
exactly.
do that.
Exactly.
We'll do that. I mean, we want to be there. So that's next on my list. I know that's early May. So I'm hoping they open registration really soon, and happy to buy a booth in the place to be able to be there.
Well, Leyland Streiff, is there anything else you'd like to say before I let you go?
I don't think so, outside of the fact that I really hope, people are excited by exercising their, democratic process here. I hope that they're able to go to our website if they'd like to support us. There's many different ways to join the newsletter, donate, go to protectgirlsportsinmaine.com. And I urge everyone to read the bill and to be able to have their own perspective on the issue of sex-based discrimination that's happening today and what the solution is. We propose that we have a solution that is the most inclusive, fair, common sense way to go forward. If someone's got a better solution, I'm happy to hear it. But right now, we are all about ending sex-based discrimination. And I think most of the state would agree with us. We are way too progressive to do anything other than that.
Well, Leyland Streiff, thank you so much for joining the show, and I wish you the best of luck.
Thank you for having me. Really appreciate it.